Hey, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of Double Trouble with Jessie. Hope you all had a wonderful break for the past hour. But now it's time to get back to our decodes. And without any further ado, ta-da.
Hello,
Madame,
hello.
you back?
I'm back.
Wonderful. Look forward to seeing what this is about. Wow.
Yeah, there's a
It,
lot with
mm,
this, sadly.
yeah. Well, let's get into it. Do you want to open for us in prayer?
Yeah, let's do it. Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this time together. We ask for your blessing over our audience and ourselves. We ask for your protection on our airwaves, our internet, our technology. And Father, we ask that you would carry the conversation today, that it would be lighter and not as dark, even though it is going to revolve around dark themes. We ask that we may leave refreshed, feeling like we have authority and that we can use the information that we learn in prayer and intercession. We ask this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jessie. Cool. Well, we are doing Ronald Hicks,
Yeah.
Ritual and Authority. Wow. Welcome,
Right.
everybody. Cool.
Yeah, this is the fourth in our kind of series we're doing that all tie together. We have the Grammys, we have the Bad Bunny Super Bowl performance, we've got the Winter Olympics. And at the same time as all those things are going on, we have Ronald Hicks accepting his succession into the former position, which was held by Timothy M. Dolan. Now, if you're not familiar with Timothy M. Dolan, I encourage you to read my affidavits and my Congress petitions. You can find those on timothycharleshomeseth.com. But in there, I go into extensive details of rituals that I witnessed Timothy M. Dolan be connected to in connection with your Northern Circle, which is going to include people like HRC, her husband, other presidents and political leaders, including Dick Cheney and others more famous, whose names we can't necessarily say on here, but all past presidents. Um, and his service as a high priest. I've named him in connection to locations like the Biltmore, where I witnessed Elon Musk and other boys, Saif Gaddafi, who recently was assassinated. I witnessed Timothy M. Dolan lead them through the blasphemy rituals. And so, this is very significant in the timing in connection to everything that we saw in the performances for the Grammys, the Super Bowl, and the Winter Olympics. It's not accidental. It's all very purposeful, and it's their way of showing who's taking authorities, who's taking over certain things. What things are they taking over? We're going to get further in that, but we brought out with the Grammys Lady Gaga's display and performance of the Abracadabra show. We brought out that Abracadabra is both the name of a spirit as well as a spell that they're going to do. That spell being the opposite of what they're going to consider, their light side Kabbalah, which is a triangle with Hebrew letters in it, which when you work it a certain way, you end up with all 72 names of God, is what they're going to say. Abracadabra works it the other way, where you also get 72 names, but these supposedly being all of your, princes of hell and beyond. So, we're starting to get into very dark magic. We brought out how Abracadabra in her performance, there was a lot of subtle things done with clothing that made it look like, you know, dead things, the way that they did the lines, it looked like staples or, like a sewn dead body. You also had where they'll use the rivets, um, like, either clips or a whole bunch of little buttons. You could see the zipper looks, all of those all together, displaying the necromancy and the necrophilia that comes with the abracadabra magic and spells that they're going to do. That spirit is known to um, want to abide around the places where you're going to have blood, whether that's catacombs, whether that's graveyards. They have to summon that spirit in connection to the dead. Otherwise, it's not going to come. So you see, this kind of theme in their attire. We're going to even see it in Hicks' attire in subtle ways. So let's start put that up as we get into what is all happening. So the first thing we notice is his mitre hat, and the mitre hats are designed so that really they represent the fish head. They represent an allegiance and an alliance to the ancient Philistine god Dagon, which was a fish god. The same type of fish god was worshipped by the people of Nineveh when the Lord sent Job to Nineveh to speak out against them. So we see the imagery of the fish god there, but we also notice, like I've talked before, how on the mitre hats, they will display their contracts on there. And, and that can include their colors, it can include certain symbology. And because it's lighter colors and they almost embed some of the symbology on it, it can be a little harder to see what the images are and what they're supposed to look like. But we can kind of make it out in that picture to the right there, where you see in that middle piece, you see kind of that hidden imagery representing the Kabbalah tree above and below. That same symbology is going to represent Baphomet. It also is going to represent Ashtaroth and Abaddon and Leviathan. So you're going to get a connection with all those entities in that subtle imagery. And I encourage you, see if you can find the Kabbalah tree imagery. You get two forms. You get part of the tree going up, which represents supposedly your good Kabbalah. You get the bottom part of the tree, the Kiphoth, which is going to, supposedly represent the evil and death. Together, that top part of the tree, the Kiphoth, is going to represent, their oaths to silence, their oaths to the Hiphoth, and, their connection to the deities, particularly Abaddon and Ashtaroth. And it's going to present, they're going to see that as representing the first part of their end time messianic beliefs, which get into, who do they believe is the Messiah. And the top part of that tree, they see the Messiah as being connected to the serpent that's raised up. That's the imagery for it. The bottom part, the second part of the Messiah, they see as the scorpion. And so both of those things connect to ancient underground cities and territories where they are going to connect to the dead, whether that's through the vaults of the dead, whether that's through ancient practices, which we'll get into this because it does get into ancient practices, especially Egyptian practices, where they're going to be skilled in certain things, including mummification. And they believe that they have an end time army of individuals that they've been mummifying for generations, saving those bodies. And you get certain individuals that are trained to read ancient Egyptian books where they believe they will raise the dead and will raise these dead armies in the last days. So as we continue to look at his hat, notice the hat and then also the lapel across his shoulders. Notice all the rickets, like the little gold and the red rickets. That's what I'm talking about. That's one of their symbols. Like, they'll do it in different ways, but when you see that, that tells you that they are connected to the worship of the dead. And when you see, we see him in the mitre hat, he's got the lapel. Those are all connected to his contracts with some of the entities that he's going to be serving in connection to that. Most of the time, you're going to see on the mitre hats, you'll see a cross, or you could just see a straight, like without the little rickets on the two sides there, you would just see a colored piece of material. When you see that, it's representing that single easel, like you see the Washington Monument raised up. We see it in some of the churches, representing a gate of Baal, those who are going to worship Baal. But when you see it kind of like he has it, where, rather than that base of a cross, which is what the easel also represents, that main Kabbalah tree at another layer. Then as they get further, you'll start to see crossbars, and those crossbars then will represent their contracts. If the crossbar's high, it represents their allegiance and contracts with Samael. If the crossbar's low, it represents their contracts with Asmodeus, also known as Asmodai. Now, when you see it, where the sides of that easel, like are displayed in his mitre hat, are emphasized rather than going the other rather than being crossbars going the other direction. When you see the easel with the crossbars on the side, that tells you they are a high priest of the dead. That's what he is. Now, because you kind of have that middle piece of cloth having a yellow tint and hue to it, you may see those cross bars being red. You may see them being purple. You may see them being green or black. All of those are going to have different meanings and significance. But when you see the red and the yellow, or the purple and the yellow, it even could be gray and yellow, that's going to also connect them to Opus Dei and overseeing the Knights of Opus Dei. And if you look into Opus Dei, you know that they get into very grotesque sexual engagements. They're going to be the ones engaging with feces, urine, all sorts of, you just can't even imagine the stuff that they do. And that will include the dead, like we said. So, this guy is something else, I'll tell you what. But we also see his lapel there. You see the rickets outlining the lapel. We see it up high and then coming down like a T or a Y. That can represent several things. It can represent your connection to the Order of Thule, which is going to get into your Austrian ancient brotherhood. So he could be somebody training for that. Or, what I mean by that, not that he's training, but he's training up others into that. And he then steps up as, one of the major high priests in the New York area, training in that. And you do have several older churches in the New York area that are still under that brotherhood group. There's not many left of those. They really have been weeded out, but you still do have a few in those areas. We also see, on that lapel, we see the oak leaves representing the Druidism and those who are skilled at making white gold. And you get a form of white gold. White gold is the main, they're going to call that the elixir of life. And they're going to connect that with places where they also believe they've got, the fountain of youth or the fountain of life. One of those places being in St. Augustine, Florida. Wherever they call the springs that they have the fountain of life, those fountains are going to be very sulfur smelling waters. But you have another elixir that is going to have things added to the white gold, which is going to be in connection to the dead. And he displays some of the things with that, that it gets into your ancient practices of mummification and special oils and items, natural items that they're going to use, which we'll get into. He displays those in his symbols, but they use them in the mummification and, believe that they're giving life to the dead. You see also the what looks like in his lapel, the thistles, but they're kind of red instead of your normal purple thistle flowers. That also is going to be all connected with special tinctures, potions, things that they're going to make in regard to the dead. So, so far this guy's specs are what I call really fantastic and spectacular. To add to it, all this stuff with Bad Bunny is happening. We're bringing out all this stuff about, him possibly displaying his movement of children routes, his different, he had pointed out a jeweler with diamonds, right? We know what they do with diamonds. We know what the Vatican does with diamonds. And yet you have this man quoting Bad Bunny. And this is what he quotes: "If you want to have fun with charm," now think about that. Charm is another word that's used with spells and incantations and witchcraft. So if you want to have fun with charm and style, all you have to do is spend a summer in New York. And he said this in Spanish, echoing the opening lines of Nueva York by Bad Bunny. Why in the world would a Catholic priest be quoting Bad Bunny? Just think on that. What place does that have in a place where you're supposed to be supposedly honoring God and lifting up God? Why would he bring in something just to connect with people? It's this is just the reality of who they are. There's an alliance, and Ronald Hicks has an alliance with Lady Gaga, with Bad Bunny, with all the prominent people we see popping their heads up, part of these circles, and he's making his way, taking over his proctor, Timothy Dolan's position. He's stepped into it now, and he's not supposed to be there. Who's supposed to be in that position? Timothy Dolan, for end time things. So you've got him bringing somebody in that is supposed to be a helper to him, but now he's all of a sudden putting him front and center. There's something going on for Timothy Dolan. Very hugely, there's something going on for him. We can be sure of that. And he's trying to just make sure there's a way to fake it and make it, because he may not be able to fulfill his end time position. That's the reality of it. Let's go ahead to the next one. So as we get into this, it's going to get deeper. We see him with his scepter there, which is, the Ashtaroth, the evil shell swirl, representing both the Eye of Horus as well as the Kabbalah evil shell. So we can be certain, that this Ronald Hicks is very skilled at Kabbalah. And, among other things, we're going to see, he really is going to get into some of the ancient Egyptian practices. Let's go ahead to the next one. So here you see more, kind of a better view of his lapels there going down. The mitre hat with the two parts coming down on the side. We see that in a lot of the Pope's coat of arms, or in connection to your diocese church. Those are, I call those the mantle, but those also represent the fins for the fish god mitre hat. Then you can see better the Y shape of the lapel going down. And we see that imagery of the tree, the upper part of the Kabbalah tree, but done with the thistle look, and the bottom part also done with the thistle look. Now, as we begin to get into our Aztec, Mayan, and Incan contracts, we start to see some of that same symbology used in some of their imagery. And so what does that tell us when we see him using that same imagery? It tells us about the orders he's connected to. You are going to have a connection to the Golden Dawn, but more than the Golden Dawn, you're going to have a connection to the Order of the Phoenix. And with that, that's going to be a lot of how he's getting, doing his necromancy and necrophilia in practice, is going to be in connection to those ancient ritual sites. So that's some of what we're seeing there. We also see up at the nape of his neck, and that's a very significant spot. So we're going to talk about that for a minute here. But we see the Knight of Malta cross right at the nape of his neck. Now, that part of the neck, the thorax, is where they take certain contracts. And they literally will put like a Bible, or they will put a shovel, spade, at that nape of the neck back there. And that contract is with death, particularly with the angel Azrael, who is the angel of death. That's the one that we see in Exodus that comes through during the 10 plagues that hit Egypt, and takes the life of all the firstborn of the Egyptian children. So he has a contract with Azrael, but they have that Knight of Malta cross right there, which means what? What does that tell us? It tells us that, it's not just about his contract, but he's now being put into a position where he's going to be overseeing knights, but he's going to be the one sealing them. He's going to seal them in those contracts with death. So we know that he has made alliances with Azrael, and that is also going to connect with his skills in mummification and end time armies. So that's what we're seeing back there. We also see the top of the thistle there, and kind of the sun ray imagery, a top capstone there, right below that Knight of Malta cross. And, that imagery being connected to Avedon. So at that thorax, he also has a contract with Avedon. So this is highly significant. Um, you know, he's not trained, I'll say fully. You know, he did not receive the same training that Timothy Dolan did, but could Dolan have trained him enough? Um, you know, absolutely he could. So, you know, this really is somebody to kind of keep our eye on, because we're going to see a lot of negative things come in, especially in the New York area, because that's where he's going to be assigned in connection with the New York diocese there. Let's go to the next one here. So in this, we see him at the door, and he has to do the traditional 3 knocks. That's part of a ceremony. That's how, in Masonry, as well as your high levels of the system, if you want to get in a door or open a door, you have to knock 3 times. You have to enter by the knocks, a sign, a symbol, a token. So this is how he enters in, is with the 3 knocks, and telling us that this is an initiation ritual. He's elevating in his positions, and he's going to enter in. Go ahead to the next one. And so we see here, and I think this even, I may be wrong in this, but I think that this even is the St. Patrick's, or the St. Patrick's Church in New York, which is very interesting, especially if you just saw the movie put out by Melania Trump. I think this is the church that is in that movie where she stops by. And I think you even see the same priest on the left, you know, as a main key figure there. But, you know, this is a church that has, you know, Timothy Dolan has been highly involved in the system. There's so much that is involved with that church. And so, you know, you're going to notice some things. Notice how he is, as he begins to enter in, his hands are going to take a triangle position. They're going to stay right there at that chakra, middle chakra, which is, that chakra is the one where they connect to Ashtaroth. So he's going to enter in being fully open to receive the light of Ashtaroth, and whatever other major spirits are going to enter him, that he's making contracts with in connection to this church, this building. This is going to be the main fortress of his power and authority beyond Rome, which he'll be connected to as well. He will be servicing multiple locations in the New York areas, but watch where he goes. You'll see him also connected to universities, which means, you know, they're going to provide services for different locations around the world. You may see him travel, and you're going to see a connection to the Midwest, to states like, you know, Virginia, West Virginia, all of those, you know, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, all of those, even though Cardinal Dolan was not assigned to those areas, he performed rituals in those areas in connection to the Brotherhood. So you would see things that would look like pastoral care conferences. You know, they'd always have a reason for him to be there in the different areas, but you'll even see a connection to other sovereign territories, including Washington, D.C., London, and others. But so we're going to start to see, the areas he's kind of taking over. Now, Dolan is just retiring. He is still going to be active in the New York area, and he's moving into a position of training. He's claiming it's service, that he's going to be chaplain for the New York police. Now, I'm highly concerned about this. We have a man who is guilty of crimes against humanity now being a chaplain, which has full access to so many places for our police. And what will that position, make him privy to? I think it's specifically that, criminal activity in regard to the Brotherhood and the sovereign military may be covered up. And you're going to see Dolan and Hicks tag teaming things. The one looking like he's doing certain things while the other, is just as active. So this really, whether you want to call it a face front position, I think it's a very strategic move in light of things that may or may not come out about Dolan. And I think they're just trying to make a way where they can be more strategic in what is unfolding. Go ahead to the next one. So we see him enter in, and notice the hands change. One goes high, one goes low, with, fingers pretty much, he doesn't define as much. It's like the whole hand, and there's a reason for that. But you get the, basically the indirect as above, so below symbology, but with the wrong hands, like when it's done inward like that, it's meaning something, versus if he were to have his hands out, it still means the same thing, but they do it specifically and purposely for a reason. And that reason being, he's taking an authority and he's taking it in his body, which is, a homage to his contract now with Baphomet as well. And so, you start to see things in this. You see, Timothy Dolan is going to hand him the staff of Ashtaroth and the evil shell. And that's how, they're handing off that scepter representing power, authority, and him handing that power and authority over to Hicks. Now, when we think about that too, the majority of your high wizards, high priests in the system, they are going to have staffs, and they'll be classified as, light side, white magic, grays mean they study both, or black magic. And, I'd propose Hicks is probably like Dolan and is both white and black magic. Go ahead to the next one. So here you see the handoff and just some further images of that, and then the very bottom one, you see a blessing where a blessing and part of the giving away, where Dolan kind of bows his head to Hicks, while Hicks lifts his head up, giving the blessing, showing that you now have, a new priest who's going to be overseeing some of those contracts and really the forefront in overseeing the contracts. You see, Dolan being less decorated. We see his mitre hat, his position changing. you see that upside down T, representing his contracts again, the easel contracts with Avedon, Ashtaroth, Leviathan. The crossbar on the bottom represents contracts with Asmodai. And then you see that T also in connection, we've talked about that before, particularly with the Epstein connection. You're going to get certain buildings or temples that are in that T formation that are used for rituals, that representing the Temple of Herod in Solomonic magic. So any of the places in that formation, they can service. So he's kind of going to be put more into that. He may not be lingering around the dead as much anymore, but he's certainly going to still be connected to Asmodeus, who is very, one of the end time commanders under Avedon, and in connection with Samael that oversee legions of, armies. So it'll get interesting to see what transpires in all this. Go ahead to the next one. So we see him, Hicks, take his oath. Now, they always will take off the mitre hat when they take that oath, and they'll just have their head covered like they're doing a prayer. And you'll see their hands go up. But we've talked about what it means when they put their hands up like that. You saw the Pope do it. You now see Hicks doing it. Are they just doing it, as a sign to be open to God and to receive? I mean, think about that. They're receiving something. What are they receiving? They're receiving out of this book, the Alpha, the Omega. But this is going to get into your Voice of God project and end time things, which is curious. But when they have the hands up like that, it's representing the 10 Reichs. It's a Nazi oath. It has nothing to do with God at all. It has everything to do with Lucifer and their allegiance to the law versus to Jesus Christ. And really, it's a sign that they're putting the law above everything else. They're claiming that law, which, we know the Leviathan system falls under the Sanhedrin. So when we think about that, the Sanhedrin rejected Jesus Christ as their Messiah. They proclaim something else is the Messiah, or someone else. So really, it's a direct way of raising up the law. They're proclaiming that they're in the Noahide law, which is pre-Christ, and they're connecting it to the words of Christ, which say, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, in the book of Revelations. And, they're connecting all of that to end time things and the Antichrist that they are going to proclaim as God. So it's all subtle in that, but that's what that symbology is. And he has to be ushered into those oaths and vows so that whatever secret knowledge he gets from this point out, is going to be connected to that. Because what we're going to see happen, is that these end time priests are going to be connected to bringing in false Christ. That is going to lead to the rise of the false Christ, the Antichrist. So, they're going to be under vows and oaths for that, because it's, very top secret information, and you get Dolan highly connected to that. We see him take a seat. This is important to understand, especially when you see that. Look at the structure of the throne and then think about the architecture. how, we've talked about spiritual gates, we've talked about certain architecture, how that architecture connects to altars, and how, when you have architecture that's similar, like your Capitol buildings, you could get from one building that's similar to another building that's similar. So we see very specific structure on that throne, displaying the authority that he's taking now. He's sitting in that seat, meaning he's taking the contract, and he's going to be connected to places. And what we see, the pinnacles, which we know those pinnacles are connected to altars of Lucifer. Right below that, we see the coat of arms for the New York diocese, which the coat of arms display what are their specs, what are their specialties, what do they train in. We know children are going to be going through their programs, and he will be in charge of training up children in brotherhood ways and sovereign military ways. And so we'll look into what is he going to train them in. Let's go to the next one. So here we see for your Diocese of New York, and that's on the left, and then on the right we see Timothy Dolan's coat of arms. So, very similar except for one difference, the color of the Jesuit hat. You'll get the Jesuits classified into a couple different colors. Most common are the green or the red, but that represents the Jesuits, which we know that many of your Jesuits are connected to three-letter agencies, that many of them are trained assassins. They're going to be moving in connection to sovereign military through different areas or territories. They're going to be moving assets for the system. They're going to, operate in different ways, but their operations are military-wise, and their operations are, many times going to be underground. Now, we see the knots and we see the tassels on the side. So that telling us, when you see those tassel tiers, usually it's common to see anywhere from 3 to 5 on each side. On one layer, each of those tassel tiers is like when he holds up his hand. We showed how the holding up of the hand represented a tablet of the 10 Commandments. So when you see each side of those tassels, each one represents that Noahide law at one layer. It also represents the Rites. And, most common, you have 3 to 4 Rites, but when you see 5 on both sides, that's going to be your 10 Rites. The Rites are also going to be connected to access to underground. How deep is the underground? How many layers? And who has access to those layers? What are you going to have in the layers? You could have, specialty markets. You could have connections to breeder program areas. You could have connections to military labs, connections to special things that they're making or overseeing. You get all sorts of things in connection to those layers. So the tassels and the knots are going to tell you, how many degrees they have to be in connection to being able to, kind of access those. Like it's going to get more complicated. Like the knots and the tassels go together. So at the one layer on the forefront, you're going to have, that affinity sign, meaning that they're going to be dedicating their sovereign military to Leviathan under a Leviathan contract. and then it will get more complicated. So their base front, will be preceptors, which we see that also with the preceptor cross in the middle. Then we see kind of what are the specialties. We see that Dutch fan telling us that there's a market there. We see the crosses for the Knights of Malta, which means your Knights of Malta are going to find that market highly lucrative. It's going to be a place where they can get supply and wages. On the other side, we see the crescent moons upside down. Those are going to go back to your Lilith contracts. You will get certain groups that also bear those, like your Shriners. You get also your certain high priestesses that will have those upside down crescent moons. You also can get a connection with Avedon. So there's going to be, connections. You can get a connection with your Lions Club symbol with that. So you see 3 separate ones, which means, they're going to have different layers and different people they're training for different things. Then we see the red crown and the scroll. And that's significant because, the crowns will represent their authority, but also most of the time you're going to see a gold crown. The red crowns, mean that there's a special training, there's a special connection. Usually when you see the red crown, it's a type of cap that you're going to see the Freemasons wear, and it will look more like a cap than a crown. It's going to be in connection to your Royal Arch degree, and the next layer in that. You also can get a connection with it with your Order of Melchizedek, which is the second layer after in your Royal Arch degree, which is a form of like when they're entering into the sovereign military, they can come in as a Knight of Malta or in the Royal Arch degree or in the Polar Star. Those are the common starter sovereign knight groups. So, this is telling you that not only are they training up those who are coming in through the Knight of Malta successions, but they're also training up those who are coming in through those Royal Arch successions. The scrolls represent specialty. It's like, hey, we've got a secret library. We've got, selective ancient prophecies and books. And those specialty scrolls are going to be specific to the necromancy and the dead there. So that's the first part of that. So let's get into Hicks now. And we're going to kind of see, go ahead to the next one. We'll see very similar, almost the same things. We see the diocese coat of arms, which was, connected to Dolan's coat of arms. So I'm not going to rehash that. But then we see Richard Hicks. So notice first off, right, he's got that cross. He doesn't have a second crossbar. Hicks is not a regional leader, whereas Timothy Dolan was considered a sovereign military regional leader, but also able to train them. We see this cross of his, and where does that cross connect to? That's going to go back to your some of your further third and fourth successions that come out of your Knights of Malta. And it's going to connect to, you get 2, but you'll see the Knights of the Order of Jerusalem will be different. Usually you'll see that red and you'll see the 4 stars around it. When you see it like this, where it looks like two colonnades instead of your regular Knight of Malta cross, that's going to connect to your Order of the Temple of Temple of Solomon, which is connected to your Order of Phoenix. It's also going to connect to your Order of the Maccabees. So, we also see that Hicks is not so far along in his Reichs. He's only Third Reich. That's what that's meaning when we see the tassels. He's only Third Reich. So think about the access then. We know that church, it has 10 Reich access. There is an underground Nazi submarine line connected to that church that goes all the way to Washington, D.C., as well as other places. And sadly, and I say this kind of humorously as a joke, poor Hicks isn't going to get a submarine ride just yet. However, let's look at his little coat of arms there. We see the purple and white. That's significant. Purple and white is like when you see them twisted together, that represents your lower end Masonic lodge male escorts. Great. We kind of see like it looks like a banner there. We see a separation in that coat of arms. Hicks is going to be training up male escorts. We'll just say it as it is. And what groups is he going to kind of be privy to? We see, the heart there. That heart often connects with your Dominican and your Carmelite monks or friars. You also see the quill. That's going to connect to your quill and pen order. Some of our presidents were part of the quill and pen order. L.B. Johnson being one of them. Lady Bird Johnson. So is he going to have access to the LBJ library, which has a massive ritual site underneath it? That's possible. Now, that ritual site is also going to connect to Multnomah Falls in Oregon. So those are some of the areas that could be extras where we could all of a sudden see him connecting to. Well, then we see the sprig of rosemary and the 3 lilies. The 3 lilies are going to represent the queens of the dead. You'll see the lilies on the tombs, like certain special tombs they'll have in graveyards will look like trees. It's common to see on those tree gravestones to see lilies, and that, is going to be connected to the Order of the Foresters, also your Order of the Tall Trees of Lebanon. But when we see it like this in this imagery, it's specifically in reference, to the dead, and you get your queens of hell. And so, he may be in charge of training priestesses that are connected to the queens of hell. And then we get to the sprig of rosemary. Now, your sprig of rosemary is used in mummification. It's part of the ancient embalming and burial practices that the Egyptians would use. So it was part of the embalming process, and they would use it when they were working among the dead. They would put it into the graves. So this is just one more thing that says to us, wow, this I mean, I'm being sarcastic here, but it's like, wow, what a winner. I mean, this is really scary for New York, that they're putting this man, I know how dark Dolan is. And, I can't imagine somebody picking up those practices that Dolan was engaged in. Some of the places where they could be working in connection with Lady Gaga and Bad Bunny. You have, I brought out with Lady Gaga the connection to Antarctica, the connection to Greenland. Your upper Ragnarok areas are huge areas where they have a connection to what are, I guess, I'm going to call it your pits of the living dead. These are military bases that have massive cement pits where they, after they've mutilated people, they just throw them in there. And not all of them have died. They survive until they die off of the dead. And, another area for that is your Finger Lakes area, that military base. In New York there, then you also get Jackal Island is the other place I mentioned for now. So, you get your high priests and high priestesses who are going to be overseeing those things, displaying their specs and their specialty abilities, their specialties, and they're going to be training children in this. It's horrific. The majority of the children, hierarchy children, the first time they'll experience those things is around age 5 in Antarctica. That usually is their first experience. And to put words to it, if any of you have seen Swinging Todd, the musical, if you imagine that, but then add to it, the priestly outfits and classical music and the images of, psychiatric hospitals, that would be a few words to kind of begin to give a picture for what that scene is like for these children. Again, it does, triple X, it doesn't even classify as triple X at all. So just it's horrific to think that, we now have 2 people that we've identified beyond Lady Gaga, Marina Abramovich, Bad Bunny, and others who are going to be participating in these things. And, is there a place for it? What do we do when we know that there are such chains of wickedness? Certainly we cannot be allowing these people to have a position, a place that's supposed to be one of honor, one that's meant to be holy and to be serving, the Lord God Almighty, and, raising families and, the church body in the ways of God. They don't, we can't imagine the evil, and how can we silently just let them display their form of godliness and be okay with it? I'm not okay with it. It makes me really mad. It makes me mad to think that, children are going to witness others be mummified alive, and that's going to be something they're told is okay because they're raising up an end time army and it's for their power and their authority. And, I'm not okay with it. But let's go ahead to I think we had one more, or was that the last one? Yeah, so just the side by side, you can kind of see the difference. And I think this is why Dolan is simply becoming a chaplain in the area. Go ahead to that last one, is because, Hicks isn't yet up to par with Dolan. And this is the church there. You see the 3 archways, gates to hell at the face front there, but that representing a northern wall. There are multiple altars. You have altars up high, You have altars up in the high places of the buildings around. You also have an altar along that western wall on the ground, underground. But, this is the church that they serve at, where horrific things happen to children. It really should be classified as a place where crimes against humanity have occurred. I would even, so many of these churches, as hard as it is for us to grasp and understand, it is my firm belief that the death count far exceeds some of the most horrific prison camps that we know, like Auschwitz. I would say the death toll here far exceeds Auschwitz. So let's get into that just for a minute as we, look at the interior. We see everything that tells us this is a gate to hell. When we get into the death toll, this ritual of Hicks taking this succession, and we think of all the Grammys, everything going on around, this took place on Dolan's 76th birthday. Now, we know that the elite, when there's a birthday, they sacrifice that number of children in honor of that person's birthday. So this man Hicks was initiated on Dolan's 76th birthday. Yet, because you have the connection with the dead and abracadabra and the depth of everything, that's not just 76 children. It's 76 children on every altar. Now, we know in abracadabra, that name represents 72 altars. So what's the math? 72 times 76. That's a lot of children that just died for Hicks to take this position, for Bad Bunny, Lady Gaga, all these people in connection stepping into their next degrees, and then they're all masters of the dead. So what are they doing with those children, that mass amount they've just sacrificed, right? I think that this is, this act should be considered a crime against humanity. Sadly, I don't think there's anything that people can, beyond making the report after. Are there going to be any signs? Is there going to be anything they've left to be discovered? Absolutely not. They're masters of covering up. But St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York should have a big fat red tape on the door that says permanently closed. It should be considered a place of, where crimes against humanity have taken place, and, it should be remembered that many lives were lost in this place throughout the centuries. This last massacre just is the top of the, the cherry on the cake for them. Yep. So again, it's not supposed to be. I think it is in retaliation of those who have testified against Dolan, because he should be in that position. So really, it's unnecessary, the bringing in of Hicks. And like, if it was just Timothy and his birthday, just, probably 76 would have died. But because they brought in Hicks and did a special thing, you get more death. And I think that's in retaliation of testimony against Dolan. So anyway, go ahead.
That is absolutely astounding. I mean, here's the number. I was like 41666 kids, right? Isn't that it? when you
Yeah, I didn't,
calculate those
yeah,
numbers.
let's calculate it maybe. I'm looking up the calculator quick. It's a lot, you know?
That
Let's do
is so.
76 times
Uh,
72. Yeah, 5,472.
okay, that wasn't the one I was looking at then. I mean, that is unbelievable. Are you sure that's all there is? 76 by
I
72.
might be doing the math wrong.
Hang on, let me look, because I think it's a lot more than that. That's more than 5,000 kids for sure.
It's a lot.
Yeah, okay, it's 5,700.
472, yeah.
Wow.
Right?
You know what I find disturbing is that, of course, every child who loses their life like this I mean, there are just no words. But I'm hearing more and more, like when we speak to some of the kids that were actually forced to do sacrifices, they will say that, in fact, almost all of them that I've spoken to have said it's Mexican kids.
I
Why?
wouldn't say
Why
that
are
was my experience, but you do get a lot of different cultures and countries.
okay? Well, maybe I'm just speaking to the ones that unfortunately had to unalive the Mexican children. But wow, I was just
Yeah.
wondering, there's a pattern. And, we're hearing about so many kids, especially the Mexican kids at the border. And, again, that makes me wonder because, those Mexican tribes are all part of those First Nation tribes,
Yeah.
like,
Well, you
so
get to add the
again,
connection back to the Aztec, the Mayan, the Incan,
you see, there you go.
the ancient.
Wow.
I think that even you get into the ancient Hittite, some of those,
Yeah.
ancient people groups through that.
Very disturbing. And yeah, what does one say? There are no words because it makes me feel sick. I mean, I must say, a lot of this Epstein stuff coming up, I don't even look at a lot of it. But every now and again, there's this, and whether how true it is or not, whether it looks pretty real, but all of those videos look a bit dodgy and, all
Yeah.
murky. But them chasing the kids around and the kids screaming, it sounds so real. Now, whether it's a real deal video from
Mm-hmm.
that or something that somebody is,
Generated,
I
yeah.
don't know, doesn't
You
matter.
also
But
you
wow,
also get with all that all the recent stuff with Mexico too, the discovery of ancient tombs and Mayan cities. One of them we're going to get into next week, the ancient city of Valeriana. What's interesting about that is in my affidavits, I've talked about some of the names of the mothers of darkness, and you get, that Valeriana being connected to, sacred spaces being connected to some of the mothers of darkness, and you know, their connection to the Order of the Phoenix and ritual sites for the Order of the Phoenix. And it's important to understand, the contracts that these people have and how that connects to these ancient sites. Whenever they talk about discovery, it's really not a good thing. It's not, they want us to think like it's just like a museum, like the museum effect, like, ooh, look what we've discovered and we're opening it up now for you to see. And, but they want to kind of put a library effect on it. But really, these are places where, they have massacred people and, they're connected to contracts with ancient entities. And so when they do these unveilings, it means that they're opening back up those contracts, which means there's going to be altars, there's going to be sacrifices, there's going to be things that they have to do to fulfill those contracts. They don't just get to discover and access these territories and, it just be like a fun museum and library day. That's not how it works.
The gods need to be appeased for that privilege.
That's right. And we see all that opening, in light of what we're seeing with people proclaiming to be high priests and priestesses of the dead. So where are some of their ancient armies? Where are their ancient ritual spots? It's not by accident that they're doing these revealings now, while people are stepping into positions and proclaiming things. They're opening stuff up and wanting us to, be aware, which means they're going to start wanting to have people come and collect energy and really re-energize that place, bring it back to life.
How do they do that? Is that then with the sacrifices, or do they?
Well, even just having people walk through, like if they're collecting their quantum identifiers, it just adds energy to the place.
Interesting. Juliet Bryant, who's the survivor from South Africa, who I interviewed on Epstein, she mentioned, and it's funny because she was speaking about that before she mentioned that on this show before a lot of other people started speaking about that, as well as the laboratories that she woke up under Epstein Island, or one of the underground laboratories there, I do believe. She was talking about that. And also, that whole base in New Mexico, I think it is, that a lot of people are talking about right now. But a lot of alien UFO type activity there. That's what she was saying as well. Now, suddenly a lot of people are speaking about that there. So whatever it is they're doing there, it's obviously off-worldly, in-worldly, confuse the worldly.
Areas, you get connections to the ancient, entities, and interesting stuff for sure. Lots going on.
For sure. Well, I say thank you so much for joining us, and again on our Double Trouble Wednesday with loads of information. And we thank you for that. And next week we will be doing the first show. The second show is a members show on Harry Potter. So we're going to be decoding the second Harry Potter movie next week in this slot. So that's a members show. So that'll be for members. So to log in there with us, please join our YouTube members and have fun with us while we do things like that. Okay, guys, God bless you all, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Jess, is there anything else you want to maybe just close off with before ending with in prayer for us?
I want to encourage people to check out on my website some of the upcoming things I have coming up. I have on, let me quick grab the dates here. March, this upcoming Friday, if you can make it, I've got the Work of His Hands strategy group. We're getting into different things with that, whether you're working on diet, health, relationships, business, ministry. This group is meant to be filled with ideas, strategy, encouragement for whatever things you need to work on in life. And it's about not just doing things, but, doing good works that are going to have a depth, a height, a breadth, and a width to them that brings glory to the Lord. So I encourage people to sign up for that on my website. And then the 12th and 19th, of March, I've got the Queen of Heaven DECODE, which we're going to get into how the system uses the imagery of Mary to tell you what rituals they're going to engage in and what ritual seasons. So this will connect to the architecture and altar series that I have done, where I get into, how they use the architecture, the structure of the buildings to tell you about their altars and the entities they worship. So the Queen of Heaven will kind of get into when are they going to be worshiping those entities and how can you know when they'll be worshiping. So again, you can register for that on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. All right, let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for everything with this. Lord, we know that although there are things that we may have no control over, we know that you are sovereign in all things, that there is nothing that is hidden from your eyes. You see the evil, you see the depth of the darkness, and you know exactly the things the enemy is plotting and planning. We thank you that although the enemy may plot and plan, that nothing shall afflight, that it shall be all dead works. And so we praise you for that. And we ask, Lord, that you would deliver the children out with a mighty hand. Let the enemy no longer have that ability to desecrate the children, Lord. We ask for their salvation. We ask that as you have promised in your word in Isaiah 55, that they shall come out with joy. They shall be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before them. And we thank you for that, Father. And we know it's a work that only you can do. We ask for those who have gone through trauma and horrific events. We ask for their complete wholeness and their healing. In your powerful name, Jesus. Amen. Oh, you got to unmute.
I just love mooning myself, don't I?
You do.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate you. Both the shows, Jessie. Wow. Dark information. Very. But yeah, I wanted to say as well, the thing you were talking about getting involved, the Opus Dei, with all their disgusting defecation practices. That's actually what Jimmy Savile, Beverly Rhodes was speaking about how the Savile brothers get engaged.
Yeah. The priests for the funeral at Jimmy Carter were also Opus Dei. Our president, Jimmy Carter. Yeah.
Okay, bye. Bye, Jess. God bless. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.